Hey, Econ Kids, we're going to do mod 43 and 44 together. These pretty much go together. They're just talking about exchange rates and having policies towards exchange rates. So one of the ways, one of the things that you could have in terms of exchange rate policies is like the government can have power to influence some of that exchange rates. When we modeled it and we were talking about like goods and services that are going back and forth, or currencies that are going back and forth to go get those goods and services, we did like a floating exchange rate, like a market exchange rate. But sometimes countries deliberately want to manipulate their exchange rate to try to make goods and services in their own country appear more inexpensive, so that somebody might want to, be able to export more in terms of goods and services that way. So think about China it comes to mind because people have complained about that one recently, where if they're trying to keep their currency devalued, then the only result of that is going to be they're going to export more goods and services, right? And in the United States, if you're complaining because you want to be able to produce more goods and services in your own country, then you're probably saying, hey, by them keeping their exchange rate low, that's the result, right? That they're going to end up exporting more. At the same time, in the United States, you're taking advantage of those cheap goods because certain currencies are devalued. So, I mean, it kind of goes both ways. Yes, you are losing in the net exports game, but at the end of the day, you're also winning as consumers because you get cheap goods from places like China. So, an exchange rate regime is just a rule governing policy towards an exchange rate. You can have a fixed exchange rate or you could have a floating exchange rate. The fixed one is where the government kind of keeps it near a particular target. The floating is the one that we were describing, where you let the market forces decide. How can an exchange rate be fixed? Well, you have to have foreign a foreign currency has to decide to do that. A country has to decide to do that. And as you're looking at it, maybe the more interesting question is, well, why would they want to? Well, if they do that, it does create trade certainty, because you are saying you're always going to get this much for your particular currency. Like, your currency is always valued at this. So if you're in another country, you know what you're going to get when you're doing some exchange rates. There's not going to be something crazy out there where all of a sudden some other country's currency becomes way more expensive as you're trying to buy their goods, and then you can't quite buy as many. It does act as sort of a check on inflation because, again, your currency is going to be like fairly stable here, and you're not going to see goods and services all of a sudden go up a ton compared to what the currency is, because the currency is always going to be in check. Against fixed exchange rates, you do have to have a lot of currency on hand to be able to offset some of that stuff. It does have some interesting incentives about something even like worker pay, as you're trying to make sure that your goods are always going to be about like the cheapest goods available, I guess, based on your devalued currency. You want to make sure that that happens. There is some opportunity for corruption in there too. And this is into module 44, where it talks about, when the euro was going on, like, why didn't Britain adopt it? And I mean, since then, we've also seen, them trying to maybe exit the European Union. But what are some trade-offs that you face, or problems with maybe using somebody else's currency versus having your own currency? How does that work in terms of trade rates? So if you think about adjusting a fixed exchange rate, what can happen? So if you devaluate, right? So a devaluation, a reduction in the value of a currency that's set underneath some sort of fixed exchange rate. Well, what happens? It makes domestic goods way cheaper, so you have higher exports. It makes foreign goods more expensive, so people don't buy other people's goods. A revaluation is an increase in the value of a currency that's set underneath some sort of fixed rate regime, and it makes your domestic goods more expensive, so you have lower exports, and then makes your foreign goods cheaper, so you end up with higher imports. Now, when you use a floating exchange rate, the ability to pursue independent monetary policy, like you can do your own thing basically based off of your currency. So your monetary policy is going to result in changes in exchange rates that are going to lead to some sort of effect, right? You could add more money into the money supply or take some money out. Changes in interest rates have a direct effect on those exchange rates and your net exports. Because if you decide to throw a bunch of money into the system, well, what's going to happen? Your interest rates are going to go down, and maybe somebody's going to go looking for opportunities elsewhere. You could take money out, your interest rates go up, and maybe people will start bringing their cash to you. We do end up, because we have currencies in this global world that we're living in, there is an international business cycle now. So rather than just having, your own ups and downs, you're kind of getting a global ups and downs of a business cycle. And you can see your floating exchange rates like typically lessen the impact of a foreign shock, because you're kind of dealing with it right there. As people are trying to buy up your currency, things are happening and then they're adjusting. So that what's happening. Your dollar will appreciate or your dollar will depreciate depending on what's happening. Module 45 is just a module where we put it all together. So we'll do one on that, but for the most part, it's a nice summation of everything macro kind of thrown together. See you next time.